Wavelength from absorbance. Is that, I feel like that is in the introduction of the lab. So is it a lab question or is it a wavelength from absorbance? There's also, if you have, it's not due for a while yet, right? If you want to come to my office hours tomorrow, I can help you with that. I think it's at 11. If not, you can just email me and set up a time. All right, another question. What kind of opportunities does a PhD in chemistry open you up to versus a master's or bachelor? So PhDs in chemistry, you don't have to get a job in just chemistry. The main routes usually people will take are to go into academia where you teach. And even there's big academia, which is Michigan State or something large research school. And there's also teaching school. So if you want to do research, you would go to a school like Michigan State. If you like teaching, then you go to a smaller school. You can go to work at a bank and have a PhD in chemistry. The big difference between master's and bachelor's and PhD, if you go into industry, let's go work at a company like Dow, is definitely salary. A job at Dow, if you're entry level with the bachelor's, will get you $40,000 to $50,000 a year, probably. Master's degree will increase from there. When my friend started at Dow, it must have been, how long ago was that? 2014 or 15. She started at 100,000. So the PhD wages are larger, and your tasks are different. So with the PhD, you are a scientist and you kind of direct other people. And so you have people that work under you, whereas as a master's or a bachelor's, your master's have a little bit more responsibility. Bachelor's is you're kind of the lab rat and you do the same thing over and over again that the PhD chemist has developed. So it really depends on how independent you want to be in your lab. And we'll talk about that in, I think, next week's lecture when we talk about careers, etc. But there's a lot of things you can do with a chemistry degree. If you're interested in forensic chemistry, being a forensic scientist, you could do that with a chemistry degree. You wouldn't necessarily need a forensic degree for that. All right, other questions? I don't see any right now. We'll circle back and check that occasionally. So grad school, researcher. We'll talk about master's versus PhD and what routes to go through there. We have crime lab, PA school. If you are thinking about PA school, you want to start thinking about clinic hours or volunteer hours for that, because I believe it requires a lot. Master's, pharmacy school. Yep. Okay. So let's get started on today's lecture. There is a cultural and academic activity coming up on September 27th. If you are interested in helping package meals for students in the district, in the EUP, there is something going on Sunday, September 27th from 7 a.m. to 4 in the Sisler Center. And that's they're doing 25,000 meals for students in Chippewa County, the EUP Independent School District, and then also the Salvation Army will also be distributing some of these. If you do participate in this activity, this will count for 2. So this is a 2-for-1 activity. Questions there? Okay, so we're talking today about Introduction to Senior Project. So what is Senior Project? This is a project that you'll create from beginning to end, and it starts not so much here because you haven't had enough chemistry classes to try to start a research project. We'll pick it up in junior seminar. This is just kind of get your feet wet so you know what this is about. You can either there's 2 routes that you can take with Senior Project. One of them is the laboratory research route, and then there's also the independent literature route where you look through papers. And some students are having to go towards the literature route right now just because of COVID and lab closeness and that kind of thing. But we have that as a backup plan. But hopefully for you guys, there's a vaccine available in a couple of years and you can get into the lab and be doing research. You'll be living and breathing the scientific methods. So your project will be based on a scientific question. You'll be able to collect and analyze the data for that, develop a hypothesis, and then test it. And then if your hypothesis is wrong, we can go back and reevaluate the hypothesis and form a new one if we need to, and then do all that over and over again. And then at the end of your senior year, you'll get to present all of your data. So you get to do science and be a scientist. And your head will be more in the game because it's not Gen Chem. It's going to be different. Usually you pick a project that you're interested in, and it's much more exciting than doing labs that you have to do to get a grade on every single week. So the classes that you have to take are junior seminar, which is Chem 395. And in this class, you'll learn how to read scientific literature, technical literature. So right now you're used to reading these procedures in the Gen Chem lab manual, and they're kind of written cookbook style so that you know what all of the steps are. But when you graduate to organic chemistry, we've kind of removed some of those steps. It's more in paragraph form. And then when you pick up a peer-reviewed article, it's not, you have to know a lot of stuff going into that article before you can repeat that experiment. So you'll get to kind of dive into that kind of literature, and then develop a research project and a project management plan. So in 395 or junior seminar, that's where you come up with a project. So my students right now are trying to think of something that they want to research, either lab or library, and they have to figure out what kind of experiments they want to do. So they get to be in charge of designing that. Yes?
So right now, I know in like biology, we're at the end of the semester, we're going to do presentations kind of like this. Mm-hmm. What's a good way to think of an experiment?
So your open inquiry project?
Yeah.
So you want to think of something that interests you? Is it this very open-ended, or do you have
no, it's kind of just like whatever you wanted, but like I know what I want to do. I don't know how to go about it.
So what do you want to do? It's easier if I have an example.
I'm interested in genetic mutations.
Okay.
But I don't know how to go about testing that.
That would, how many weeks do you have to do the experiment or the project?
I just know it's due at the end of this semester.
Okay. So that is more, that's like a senior research project, yeah. Genetic mutation. Things that are small that you can do. Some students might do things, plants. So, and you could change conditions with plants, or I would say it's pick a question or something that you've observed that is interesting. And if you can modify or make changes to that to change the end result. So, and plants, or like, you know, I've judged a lot of science fairs for elementary school kids, and a lot of them do the cookie experiment where I'm going to take out, so the recipe probably uses 1 egg or 2 eggs. So they're going to add 3 eggs, see what happens, or they take baking soda out. So it's those kinds of experiments where you can control. There's going to be one way that you're going to do it. So let's say you were doing a plant one, and you wanted to evaluate how a plant grows. And so you could change things like temperature, how much water the plant is getting every day, how much light, so if it's growing in the dark. So you try to pick conditions that you can control, and things like that, or something that's very measurable. You don't want to do something like how does the plant feel, because that's not something you can measure. It's difficult to measure. Question?
So I'm in that question. So like if you were in the aquaponics lab and you were comparing how fast your plant grows in like the tilapia tank versus, I forget what it is, it's like goldfish or something.
Okay.
The other one. So it's something like that where you can change those things, or like
yeah.
The color of the lights.
Color of the lights, the variety of, is it fish in the tanks? Yeah, so you can change the variety of fish. So some fish, there's like a class that are more carnivorous. How is that going to affect it versus something that is mostly plant-based fish? So you could change kind of those things, but just think about but one of the most important things is that you have the control. So the normal way to do it, and then change variables around that. Does that make sense? Good question. Okay, so you guys are kind of doing that right now on a smaller scale. So don't too big, pick a couple variables. Genetic mutation is awesome, but if you haven't had genetics and done those techniques, it's very difficult. So just think about what techniques that you will be doing in class and see if there's something that you can form a question of off of there. Okay, so you also during junior seminar, after you figure out your research project, you have to write a formal proposal, which contains your introduction, the methods section, so how are you going to plan to do your research, and you won't have results yet because you're not actually doing the project. So aside from the research proposal, you also prepare applications for summer jobs or internships. And if you get an internship or a scholarship in another lab, like somewhere else, that's really cool. We've had some students that have done REUs, which is the research experience for undergraduates, or there's SURFs, which is Summer Undergraduate Research Fellowship. Those are both like 10 to 12 week research programs that you can go to another institution, another school, or a government agency, and they usually pay you a summer stipend. So you get like 10, 12 weeks for $5,000 or something. They give you room and board, and you get to do research in somebody else's lab. If you get one of those, then you can use that for your senior project, and you wouldn't have to do the research here. So that one works great because you get paid, you're doing the research in the summer, so you don't have to worry about doing that while you're taking classes at the same time. And those you would start applying for after sophomore year or during your junior year. Okay. You also will present your research proposal to faculty and peers. And this is kind of let's say you came up with your open inquiry, you get to kind of have faculty pick your brain about it. So they'll give you criticism if it's something like that's too large of a scale. So some students in the past have proposed this like PhD dissertation on something that they want to do with human gene editing, and that's just not something that we're capable at Lake State. So we might tone your expectations down or give you ideas for different controls, things like that. So when you come out of junior seminar, you get to have your thesis proposal done. If you're really on the ball with your proposal, your senior paper thesis is half done. Your introduction is done. If you do a really good job in your junior year, then you just have to modify a couple things, add things later on. I always tell juniors this, but they don't always listen. They just kind of do we'll throw it together, I'll worry about it next year type of thing. But you take it seriously, or try to, and get as much of your introduction done as possible, because the introduction is usually the hardest part to write. All right, so you can take junior seminar your junior year, or if you're especially motivated and you think you want to get in the lab sooner than that, you can take it sophomore year. And this is usually offered now in the fall. And so that would be next fall for you guys if you were thinking about taking that. Or you can wait till your actual junior year. All right, so when should you take Chem 395? And if you haven't checked in already to the app, make sure you check in. So when would you take Chem 395? All right, give me about 5 seconds here.
What kind of classes should we take before?
You don't have to take anything. For the prereq is USEM. So you could take it next fall. Research-wise, it helps if you've taken some organic chemistry, just so you know what techniques and what is out there chemistry-wise. So that kind of helps with that. I think that moving it to the fall semester, more students can take it earlier. So the reason that we moved it back was that you get the extra semester to do research. Before it was in the spring, so juniors would take it in the spring and then kind of throw together a project, and then they have to get their project done in the fall. But now you have that extra semester in there. But again, if you're especially motivated, you can think about taking it in the fall, next fall. So A and B is correct here. So if you chose D, that's the most correct answer. And so you can take it either of those times. Questions? Any other questions? Yeah, feel free to keep interrupting. They're all good questions. All right, so you would take 495 to actually do your project. This class is not required unless you want ACS certification. The chemistry degree, if you're straight chemistry, is anybody here straight chemistry? No. So if you're straight chemistry, that ACS thing is built in. The ACS certification is from the American Chemical Society, And that gives you, if you're going right into the job industry, it kind of gives you a little bit of a head start on everybody else's application if they came from somewhere that didn't have an ACS accreditation. So the standards for having an institution having one are a little bit higher than if you don't. So we have to have subscription to the ACS journals. All the faculty that teach the classes have to be mostly PhD. So all of your faculty are PhD except for one we have that's a master's. And then we are limited to how much we can teach. And you're also getting a certain number of lab hours if you get the ACS certification. So chemistry has it built in. Biochemistry, there's an option for ACS certification, and same with forensics. So for biochemistry, I think you only have to take 495. That's the extra class. For forensics, if you are, you probably should decide soon if you want to be ACS or not, because there's a couple extra classes. Like you have to do I think calculus 151 and 152 and not the business calc. So that would be a difference there. So you can take it 490. You don't have to register for it, but if you actually want to do a lab-based project, you should register for it. This gives you time to carry out your research. So it gives you 90 hours in the semester to do the research and be in the lab. And also it gives you a budget. If you're doing lab research and there's no money, that's not a lot of research that you can do. So if you register for the class, you get a small budget to do your research. And this will strengthen your data analysis and statistical skills. After you get done with senior project, you will have an improved introduction because you've been doing some research, so you can add bits and pieces to the intro that you did in 395. And your method section is done. And you could have a pretty good draft of your results section because you've been doing the research. Expectations vary with your mentor, so you want to meet with them often. You don't want to have like one meeting, they send you into the lab, and then 12 weeks later, you meet with them, because their expectations are yours going into it are going to be different. You want to make sure you're on the same page pretty often. And some advisors or faculty members like to get like a lot of work out of their students, and they expect 10, 15 hours a week. Some do not have the same expectations. So you can figure out what advisors those are. I'm sure if you talk to the people in the chem house, they've heard stories. So after you take 495 or don't take it, you have to take 499. So everybody has to take 499, which is senior seminar. And that is where you go through the process of making your final thesis paper, which is the big giant report. You have to do a poster. So you might have noticed posters in the hallway down here and then around by the offices. You'll be making one of those. And then you do a final oral presentation. This will prepare you for the big show, which is the Senior Research Symposium. Usually it's a Friday afternoon poster session, and then the oral presentations are on Saturday. So that's true in the spring. In the spring we have, when there's not COVID, we all have students from the entire university, so psychology, engineering, math, they all have different posters, and then we do it as a hockey arena, minus the ice part. And then everybody's presenting posters, and undergrads, other students are welcome to come. The community is invited. If you want to invite your parents, they can come to that as well. So you guys won't get to go to that right now this semester. However, I do have 3 seniors that are graduating this semester. So there's going to be an informal poster session, which will be streamed if you would like to watch it, and also recorded. The dates on that are wrong. I'll fix that. But it should be 11/13. Nope, 11/11. And then Friday the 13th is the oral presentations, and that's at 2. And the oral presentations, again, that will be streamed and or recorded. You are welcome to come to that if you want to. As soon as I get a room reserved, I'll let you know more about that. So you can see what the seniors' posters look like and presentations. So everybody takes 499, and notice how it says upon completion of 495. So whether or not you take 495, you still have to present something. So if you haven't taken 495 and you're doing something like a literature project, which is completely fine, you don't have time to do that. That's kind of something you have to do on your on your free time if you don't register for it. But if you do register for it, or a course similar, then you get time out of your schedule to actually do the work for that class. The worst thing you can do is to try to do your whole paper and take 499 at the same time. So right now I'm teaching the 499, and the seniors that are in there next week, they have to have a rough draft due of their whole thesis, which is, what are we, six weeks into the semester, and they already have to have a rough draft. If you're still starting to do your literature research and you haven't formulated things yet, it's going to be really hard to come up with a draft when you don't have that information. All right, questions? All right, so is 499 required for your major? All right, a couple seconds here. Closing the poll. All right, so we have, some of you chose A, some chose B. Yes, it is required for all chemistry, biochemistry, forensic majors. The 495, which is the senior project, that one's only if you want ACS accreditation. All right. And that 495, you can take it if you want to, even if you're not getting ACS. All right, so what's the point of doing research? If you're planning to go to graduate school or to get a job immediately after you graduate, this shows employers or graduate advisors that you are capable of being in the lab, that you took the initiative to get in the lab and be interested in it. And you have skills in the lab, and also that you can work independently. So it's a big plus if you want to go to graduate school. If you're thinking about professional school, you don't necessarily need lab research, but it does help. It boosts your CV or your resume over somebody that maybe didn't have lab experience. It can be fun. Chemistry gets to be exciting, and you get to apply a different kind of scientific approach to a question of your interest. So that would be my other piece of advice. Make sure when you pick a project that it's something that you're interested in, because if you're not interested in it, it will suck big time. So if you find Gen Chem not fun right now, and just think of doing that for 90 hours in a semester and trying to pretend to be interested in it. And then when you go to present your final poster, it's going to show. So make sure that you can find some interest in that area. You also get to contribute to an area of science that you are interested in, and also become an expert, because you're the only person running those experiments. You are alone are the person that knows about those things. So this doing research will illustrate your abilities, I said, like working independently. It also builds your skills in different areas. So library research, we know that you can find information, filter it out, see what's important, what's not. Project planning, so you have to figure out what your project is going to be about. If you have statistics involved, that will help you with that, or doing certain calculations. Lab techniques is a big one. So depending on who you work with, you might get to use instruments heavily that you wouldn't in a normal class. So if you are doing something heavily in synthetic organic, you might spend 50 or 100 more hours on the NMR than a student that just took the class. We have that whole suite of Cannabis Center of Excellence instrumentation. You will get to use a lot of those in your classes. Who's Cannabis in here? Cannabis, a couple of you. So you will get to use those pretty heavily. Right now for the 440, which is the advanced extraction class, the students are working by themselves. There's no lab partners. You don't come in at a scheduled time. Professor Southwell gives you a task and then he sends you to it. So that's independent. And if you're doing that research on your own, it's going to be the same thing. We'll just tell you what to do and then send you into the lab. So you're going to learn a lot of techniques, and you're going to get a lot more hands-on time on the instrument than you would if you were just taking the class or instrumental. And that will help you with your written and oral communication as well. It'll strengthen your attention, hopefully, to detail. So if there's something not right about your samples, I know that some of you picked up on this in some of your labs. If a data trend is not looking right. So if you're doing the tartrazine lab this week, one of your numbers didn't look right. For some students, they might just keep going and not think about the data set, but if you're a person that pays attention to details, you notice that your line is supposed to be linear, but is not. So that's something that you might pick up on, or if the peak isn't showing up where it's supposed to, then you can go back and troubleshoot. And those are things that you're not taught necessarily in a regular class setting. You have the ability to meet deadlines and also stay organized. Okay, so there's the research, which is the lab research. This is where you get to conduct original scientific research. You generate questions and hypothesis, and you do your data collection. You're working closely with a faculty mentor, and sometimes the faculty will have a project that they would like you to work on, so that might be a different case. Or if there's an advisor, if you had something that you were really passionate about and they had some skill set in that area, they might be able to pick up that project. And then you're helping to solve a scientific problem. The literature thesis is the library-based one, so you're collecting several different journal articles and then making a new project out of there. So if it was something like COVID related, you can pick up a whole bunch of papers that had to do with transmission rates with masks. And then you're gonna find all of these bits of research and figure out what kind of masks are the worst for transmitting, and that kind of thing. So you're bringing a large pool of data together to figure out, to summarize things. And that's gonna be a different skill set in itself. So it might seem boring, but the scope of this one is wider. So if you are interested in genetic mutation, you could do a paper on genetic mutation, or something that we might not be able to do in the lab. You can do that as a literature project. Right. Okay, so which is not a type of senior research project? Which is not a type of senior research project? All right, couple seconds here. One of the things that we'll learn also is where to find scientific literature. All right, I'm closing the poll. The place that you don't want to look for scientific literature is Google. There is something called Google Scholar. Has anybody heard of Google Scholar? So those are references or resources that are a little bit more scholarly. So it kind of subtracts out all of the bunk stuff, well, a lot of it anyways. But you'll learn about SciFinder later in the semester, which is what we have on campus to do like real scientific literature searches. Okay, so the final things that you submit in senior seminar, which is $4.99, is a thesis paper, which is similar to a publication manuscript. Some students do get publications out of their research, so they actually get to do research in the lab and then have a paper that's published in some scientific journal with their article on it. It's not super common, but it does happen. This is a way to communicate your science. So all of these things include a title page, abstract, your intro, methods or experimental, results, discussion, and references. My favorite thing to do is the title page. It's like one of those little things on your to-do list that you can check off, and it makes you feel good about yourself. I did one the other day. It was very exciting. The abstract is kind of the summary, and then you have the long introduction. So thesis papers can be 10 to 30 pages long. Some students with bigger projects can almost have a master's thesis written by the time they're done. So they can be pretty big. The poster, these are visual representations of your results. So if you had your one thesis that was 30 pages, you have to somehow find the best data in there and then put it on a poster and make it look nice, which is always challenging. We have opportunities for networking. So the American Chemical Society has a local section in the UP. And once a year in the spring, we have a poster session in Marquette at Northern, and students will present posters there on their research. So you could have made a poster for here and then present it over there. And that's other stuff you can put on your resume as well if you have presentations. And then there's the oral presentation, which is you presenting your story of your research in 10 to 12 minutes, and it has those sections there. All right. Questions about any of the final products for senior seminar? Right, so for that class, when you take it, we get to the midpoint and then I run out of lectures. That's just you working time, working on your thesis, turning in drafts, etc. All right, another question for you. So which of these is not a final product of senior seminar? All right, closing the poll here. Everybody chose D, which is correct. So you don't have to have a peer-reviewed published manuscript. That's a bonus for you if you do have one. Sometimes you might be, so we have a student who is in her second year of medical school and she just published, or her with Dr. Mosey, they just published a paper recently. So it could happen. Your publication could come after you've left here, but you still get to add that to your resume. Okay, so your assignment next week is on Moodle, is about the senior thesis manual. You find it right there. I don't remember how many questions it is, but you'll find all of the answers in the thesis manual. It is lengthy. I'm not asking you to read it verbatim, but skim sections, if you need to Control F and find answers or keywords, you can certainly do that as well. So you don't have to read it verbatim. This is not a Bible that you have to memorize for USEM certainly, but that information is there. Right. That's all I have today, unless anybody has questions. Research questions, nothing. All right, you guys have a good week.